She thought she was rescuing 3 strangers from the rain. She didn't know they would save her from the storm she'd been living in for years. The rain on the Brooklyn Bridge didn't fall so much as it poured in silver sheets, turning the late afternoon skyline into a blur of glass and steel. Alexandra Hayes' driver eased the black Bentley through traffic, wipers beating a steady rhythm. She sat in the back seat, posture perfect, her phone still glowing with the last email before the Hayes Realty Board meeting. Alexandra was the image of Manhattan power, slim, tailored navy suit, silk blouse, hair pinned into a sleek chignon. The diamond studs in her ears caught what little light the storm allowed. In less than an hour, she would stand before shareholders to present the quarter's results, proof that her late husband's empire was still in steady hands. She leaned back, eyes flicking to the clock on the console, calculating arrival time to her penthouse on Fifth Avenue. Then, movement caught her attention. Not the usual blur of cyclists or pedestrians. Something else. In the center strip of the bridge, in that narrow stretch between opposing lanes of traffic, stood a boy. No more than 13. His jeans were soaked, sneakers dark with rain. He cradled 2 tiny bundles, babies, wrapped in damp towels. Her pulse stuttered. "Stop the car," she told Richard, the driver. "Ma'am, we're on the bridge." "Stop. Now." He swerved into the shoulder, hazard lights flashing, and Alexandra pushed open the door before the car had fully stopped. The rain was cold enough to bite, slicing through her suit in seconds. Her heels clattered on wet asphalt as she approached. The boy didn't move. He stood stiff against the wind, eyes fixed on the ground as traffic roared around them. The babies whimpered, a thin sound almost lost in the storm. "Hey!" Alexandra called over the rain. Her voice softened to reach him. "It's dangerous here. Let me help." He shook his head, clutching the bundles tighter. "We're fine." She was close enough now to see the trembling in his arms, the soaked towel clinging to fragile newborn skin. One baby coughed, a tiny rattling sound. Alexandra's instincts, buried for years under board meetings and business headlines, ignited. She knelt, ignoring the puddles. "You're not fine," she said gently. "They're freezing." "You're freezing." The boy's jaw clenched. "No one's going to take them." "No one will," she promised. "I'm Alexandra. What's your name?" He hesitated. "Toby." "Okay, Toby. Let me get you somewhere warm. You can stay with me, just for tonight." The babies whimpered again, louder this time. Toby's gaze darted toward the traffic, then back to her. "No hospitals." Alexandra understood the distrust. She'd grown up in a different world, but she recognized fear when she saw it. "No hospitals," she agreed. "But I have a doctor who can come to my home. She's kind. She'll help them. You can be there the whole time." He searched her face for the lie, found none, and finally gave a small nod. She stood, offering her arms. "May I?" Toby hesitated, then shifted one of the babies into her hands. Alexandra cradled the tiny body close to her chest, feeling the alarming chill through the towel. Without another word, she guided them toward the Bentley. Richard's eyes widened in the rearview mirror, but he said nothing as they climbed in, the interior filling with the smell of rain and the faint, sweet scent of newborn skin. "Fifth Avenue," Alexandra told him. "Call Dr. Stein. Emergency pediatric visit. Now." By the time they reached her penthouse, the storm had deepened into a thunderous downpour. The elevator opened directly into her living room, glass walls framing the city, art in muted tones, the quiet hum of climate control. Toby stood awkwardly on the Persian rug, dripping water onto silk fibers, staring at the high ceilings like they belonged to another planet. Alexandra took the second baby from his arms and nodded toward the plush white sofa. Sit, warm up. You're safe here. He perched on the edge, clutching his knees. His eyes darted from the grand piano to the abstract paintings to the shelves lined with first editions. Dr. Stein arrived within 15 minutes, small, brisk, and efficient, with the unflappable calm of a pediatrician who had seen everything. She unpacked her bag, her trained hands moving over the babies with precision. "Dehydrated, mild hypothermia," she murmured, wrapping each in soft blankets Alexandra fetched from the guest room. "They'll need fluids and warmth. How old?" Toby's voice was flat. 4 days. Dr. Stein glanced at Alexandra, who said quietly, "They stay here tonight." As Dr. Stein worked, Alexandra studied the children's faces. The rain had flushed their skin, but under it, there was something. It was when one of the babies opened her eyes that Alexandra's breath caught. Gray-blue. Clear, startling gray-blue, exactly like Thomas's. Her husband's eyes. The room seemed to tilt. She had not seen those eyes in 3 years, not since the night the monitors went silent in the ICU. Toby must have noticed her staring. "What?" he demanded, protective again. Alexandra shook her head, masking the wave of memories. "Nothing." "They're beautiful." Dinner was a quiet affair. Toby picked at the roasted chicken Rosa the housekeeper had prepared, as if each bite cost him something. "Where's your mother?" Alexandra asked softly. His fork stilled. "She died when the twins were born. We were in Queens." "Your father?" Toby's shoulders lifted, dropped. "Don't have one." The evasiveness was clear, but she didn't press. Not yet. After dinner, she showed him to a guest bedroom, soft gray walls, a view over Central Park, fresh linens. He stood in the doorway, clearly overwhelmed. "You can lock the door if you want," she told him. "No one will bother you." He looked at her for a long moment, then at the babies sleeping in a bassinet Rosa had wheeled in. "If you try to take them, I won't." His chin lifted, as if testing her. Then he stepped inside, closing the door with a quiet click. Alone in her study, Alexandra sat at her desk, the rain still streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number for Columbia Presbyterian's private diagnostics lab. "Dr. Lawrence, it's Alexandra Hayes. I need a DNA test. 2 infants, discreetly." Her reflection in the glass looked pale, almost foreign. She didn't know why she was doing this, except she did. Because those eyes had unlocked something she thought was gone. And if her suspicion was right, the storm on the Brooklyn Bridge was only the beginning. The morning after the storm, the city woke under a pale winter sun. From the penthouse's 35th floor, Manhattan stretched like a glittering map. Central Park's skeletal trees dusted with frost, the Hudson glinting silver at its edges. Alexandra Hayes stood barefoot on the marble floor of her bedroom, a cup of coffee warming her hands. She hadn't slept much. Her mind kept circling back to those gray-blue eyes, so achingly familiar, and the way Toby had stood between her and the babies like a human shield. The quiet of the penthouse was broken only by the faint hum of the heating system and the muffled voices coming from the guest wing. Alexandra set down her cup and walked down the hall. Inside, Rosa was sitting in a plush armchair, rocking one of the babies, a soft lullaby in Spanish floating in the air. Toby sat on the edge of the bed, the other baby swaddled in fresh blankets, his hair still damp from a morning shower. "You clean up well," Alexandra said lightly, leaning on the doorframe. He looked up warily. "We can't stay long." "You're not in a hurry," she replied. "Neither are they." She crossed the room, touching the baby's cheek with the careful gentleness of someone who had once been afraid to touch a newborn. "Dr. Stein will come back later today," she said. She wants to make sure they're gaining warmth and hydration. Toby's jaw tightened. We don't need doctors. You don't, Alexandra agreed. But they do. His silence was a wall she knew well. She had built her own walls after Thomas's death, brick by brick, polished on the outside, impenetrable on the inside. By mid-morning, Dr. Stein arrived again carrying a smaller, sleeker kit. She set it on the nightstand, her movements as precise as yesterday's. This is just routine, the doctor told Toby. Blood draw, a couple of drops, barely a pinch. Toby pulled the babies closer. Why? So I can check for anemia, jaundice, anything that could hurt them if we don't treat it early, Dr. Stein said. Her tone was calm, but her eyes met Alexandra's in the briefest glance, an understanding passing between them. Alexandra knelt so she was at Toby's eye level. You can hold them the whole time. No one's taking them away. I'll be here. After a tense pause, he nodded. Dr. Stein worked quickly, murmuring reassurance, sealing tiny vials that Alexandra knew would be delivered not just to the pediatric panel, but to Columbia Presbyterian's genetics lab. She had arranged it last night, discreet courier service, no paperwork that could be traced by anyone outside her private file. Later, when Rosa took the babies for a nap, Alexandra invited Toby to the kitchen. It was open and bright. Sunlight bouncing off white marble counters. She set 2 mugs of hot chocolate on the island, the steam curling between them. So, she began, tell me about Queens. He shrugged, wrapping both hands around the mug. Not much to tell. We had a small place. Mom worked at a diner. And school? He gave a humorless laugh. Didn't go much after she got sick. The guardedness in his voice told her there were things he wasn't ready to share. But she caught fragments. How he had learned to feed the babies from a neighbor. How he'd carried them from the hospital alone after their mother died. Alexandra listened without interrupting. She knew the art of negotiation, of waiting for the right moment to push. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was trust, earned 1 crumb at a time. That afternoon, Alexandra had a private meeting in her home office with Charles Wainwright, her attorney and one of the few people she still allowed into her inner circle. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of deliberate manner that made people think twice before lying. She handed him a slim envelope. Confidential, DNA test. I want you to prepare for any legal implications before we have the results. Charles didn't ask why. He simply nodded. If it confirms what you suspect, you'll have to address both custody and inheritance immediately. And Alexandra, his voice lowered. This could become public. The board won't like surprises. They'll have to live with it, she said, her tone sharp enough to slice paper. Evening brought another small shift. Toby joined her in the living room after dinner, settling into one corner of the leather sofa while the babies slept nearby. The city glowed beyond the glass wall, thousands of lights twinkling like a galaxy brought down to Earth. Why do you live up here? He asked suddenly. She smiled faintly. I like the view. Feels like you're looking down on everyone. His words landed with more truth than she expected. Maybe I am, she admitted. But sometimes it's just so I can see farther. He tilted his head, studying her as if he were the one evaluating her worth. You don't look like someone who stops for strangers in the rain. She met his gaze. Maybe I wasn't. Until yesterday. The next morning, the courier from Columbia Presbyterian arrived. Alexandra took the padded envelope into her study and shut the door before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, crisp and clinical. DNA analysis, probability of paternity, 99.97%. Thomas Hayes. The air in the room seemed thinner. She sank into her chair, the paper trembling in her hands. She had loved Thomas fiercely. Through every storm their marriage endured. His death had left a hollow in her that nothing, no deal, no property, no charity gala, had filled. And now she knew, with scientific certainty, that he had lived a life she never knew about, a life in which these children existed. For a long time, she sat in silence, staring at the skyline. She wasn't sure if the ache in her chest was grief, betrayal, or something more complicated, a fragile thread of responsibility weaving itself through the hurt. She found Toby in the guest room, building a makeshift barrier of pillows around the sleeping babies. "They're safe here," she said softly. "I know. Just habit." She sat on the bed's edge. "I need you to know something. I knew your—" She stopped, choosing the words carefully. "I knew a man named Thomas Hayes. He was my husband. He passed away 3 years ago." Toby looked at her sharply. "So?" "So, I think he was your sister's father." He froze, then shook his head. "No. Mom said he left before they were born. She didn't say his name." "Sometimes people hide the truth because they think it's protecting someone," Alexandra said. "But you deserve to know where you come from." He stared at her, suspicion and confusion warring in his expression. "You're not going to try to take them, are you?" "No," she said, her voice steady. "I'm offering you all a place here. To stay. To grow. To be safe." That night, she stood by the nursery window, watching snow begin to fall over the city. Somewhere inside her, the pieces of her life, love lost, trust broken, and the fragile hope she saw in Toby's eyes began to shift into a new pattern. She didn't know yet what it would look like, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The past had found her, and this time, she wouldn't turn away. The paper lay on Alexandra's mahogany desk like a shard of ice. DNA analysis, probability of paternity, 99.97%. Her late husband's name printed beneath it in black ink, Thomas Edward Hayes, wasn't just a fact, it was a fracture. She read it once, twice, a third time. Each pass didn't dull the sting, it deepened it. The years she'd spent believing in the unshakable foundation of her marriage now felt like an elaborate facade. Somewhere, beyond the life they had built together in glass towers and gala ballrooms, he had sown a separate truth. She pressed her palms to her eyes. 3 years after his death, she had trained herself to miss him without breaking, to remember without reopening the wound. This was different. This was not mourning. This was a betrayal resurrected from the grave. Her phone buzzed. Charles Wainwright's name lit the screen. She answered, her voice measured. "I have the results." "And?" "They confirm it. The twins are his children." A pause on the line, then, "You realize what this means for the estate. They're legal heirs. And if anyone on the board catches wind—" "They won't," she cut in. "Not yet. First, I make sure they're safe." "Alexandra!" She hung up before he could deliver another warning. She didn't want to think about board politics. Not now. In the guest room, Toby was sitting cross-legged on the bed, a paperback balanced on his knees. The twins slept in their bassinet, swaddled and pink-cheeked after a long feeding. "Do you like to read?" she asked, stepping inside. "Sometimes," he said, not looking up. She sat on the edge of the bed. "I got the results from the test Dr. Stein did." His head snapped up, alarm flashing in his eyes. "You said they were just checking for sickness." "They did, but I also needed to know something for the future. Toby, the man who fathered your sisters, he was my husband." Toby's grip on the book tightened. "The one who's dead?" "Yes." Silence stretched between them, heavy and taut. Does that mean you're... what? Their stepmom or something? Alexandra considered her answer. Legally, I'm not related to them, but I could be, if you want me to be part of your lives. He frowned. Why would you? You don't even know us. She met his gaze. Because I promised you on that bridge that I wouldn't let anyone take you away. And I keep my promises. That evening, she found herself staring out the penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittering far below. She remembered the day Thomas had proposed to her on the rooftop of the Pierre Hotel, promising forever in the golden light of a Manhattan sunset. Back then, forever had seemed unbreakable. She didn't know which hurt more, the fact that he'd had an affair, or the knowledge that he'd kept these children hidden from her until death forced the truth to the surface. Rosa appeared in the doorway, her voice low. Dinner is ready. Toby's helping set the table. The image of him, small, determined, stacking plates on the dining table, pulled her out of her spiral. She had no children of her own. After years of infertility treatments and a surgery that ended the possibility entirely, she had buried that dream. Now, 2 newborns and a wary teenager had arrived at her door, carrying the past in their blood. At dinner, Toby spoke little, but when Alexandra mentioned the Dalton school, his fork paused in mid-air. That's for rich kids, right? He asked. It's for bright kids, she corrected. And kids who deserve opportunity. People like me don't go to schools like that. They do if they live here, she said simply. He studied her face for a long moment, as if testing for sincerity. And the babies? They'll have the best care possible. But they need you too. Something softened in his expression. Not trust, not yet, but the first faint shift toward it. Later, in her study, Alexandra opened a drawer and took out a slim, leather-bound notebook. It was Thomas's, the one he'd kept on his desk at home. She hadn't touched it since the week after the funeral. She flipped through the pages, handwritten notes about development projects, sketches of building facades, lists of investors. And then, near the back, a page she'd never seen before. Queens, small house near the 7 train. Ask Maria about the due date. She sat very still. Maria. She could only assume that was Toby's mother. He had said she'd worked at a diner in Queens. Thomas must have visited more than once. The betrayal deepened, but so did the sense of responsibility. Whatever Thomas had done, these children had no say in it. They were here now, and they were hers to protect. The next morning, Alexandra met Charles at his midtown office, a fortress of steel and tinted glass. You're going to need to make a decision, he said, sliding a folder across the table. If you want a petition for guardianship, you'll have to act before any blood relatives come forward. Under New York law, they could contest custody, especially if they think there's money involved. She glanced through the documents, petitions, affidavits, a prepared statement for family court. I want full guardianship of all 3, she said. Toby's not your husband's biological child, Charles reminded her. He's their brother, she replied, her tone brooking no argument. I'm not separating them. Charles leaned back, regarding her with something like respect. Then prepare for pushback. This isn't just about family. It's about control of the Hayes estate. If this becomes public, your position at the company will be on the line. Alexandra met his gaze without flinching. Let it be. When she returned to the penthouse, Toby was in the nursery, helping Rosa fold tiny clothes. I have to ask you something, she said. He looked up. What? If I went to court to make sure you and your sisters stayed with me, would you want that? His eyes narrowed. Why would a judge send us away? Because sometimes the law doesn't care about promises, she said quietly. It cares about paperwork. Toby hesitated, then nodded. If you promise we stay together, yeah, I'd want that. Alexandra felt something settle inside her. Resolve, clear and unshakable. That night, when the city lights shimmered against the snow outside, Alexandra stood by the nursery window again, one hand resting on the bassinet. The babies slept soundly, their tiny chests rising and falling in unison. In the quiet, she made a silent vow, not just to protect them from the cold winds of the city, but from the colder winds of power and greed that could so easily strip them away. The DNA report had changed everything, but it had also given her a reason she hadn't had in years, a future worth fighting for. The snow had thickened overnight, dusting the rooftops and turning Central Park into a white canvas. From the penthouse windows, the city looked serene, as if the usual Manhattan chaos had been put on mute. Inside, Alexandra Hayes was anything but still. She sat at the dining table, laptop open, documents spread in careful order, a blend of corporate strategy and family court petitions. In her world, decisions were made by calculating risk against reward. But this decision was different. It wasn't about a portfolio or a merger. It was about 3 lives that had unexpectedly fallen into her hands. Toby wandered in, hair tousled, wearing a sweater that Rosa had found in storage. It was slightly too big, but it made him look older, almost like the man he might one day become. "Morning," he mumbled, sitting down across from her. "Morning," she said, closing her laptop. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." His eyes flicked to the papers. "Is it about court?" "In a way," she replied. "You told me yesterday you'd want to stay together with your sisters. I meant what I said. I want you here, all of you, but I can't just say it and make it happen. I have to make it legal so no one, no agency, no distant relative can take you away." Toby shifted in his seat. "You mean foster care?" "Yes," she said quietly. "If someone decides you're not in a stable situation, the city could place you and the babies in foster homes, and those homes might not be together." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might retreat into silence again. But instead, he leaned forward. "What would you have to do?" "File for private guardianship," she explained. "It's different from adopting through the foster system. It would mean you'd live here permanently. You'd go to school, your sisters would grow up here, and I'd be responsible for all of you." He stared at her, suspicion warring with hope. "Why would you do that?" Alexandra didn't rush her answer. "Because I see the way you take care of them. Because I promised you on that bridge. And because maybe I need this as much as you do." The conversation lingered in Toby's eyes for the rest of the morning. He followed Rosa into the nursery, fed one of the twins with practiced patience, then wandered through the penthouse as if mapping out what his life might look like here. By afternoon, Alexandra had arranged a visit from a child welfare consultant she trusted, Margaret Ellis, a retired family court judge who now advised on high-profile guardianship cases. Margaret arrived in a camel coat, her silver hair tucked neatly under a beret, her sharp eyes missing nothing. In the living room, she took a seat across from Toby and introduced herself. "I'm here to make sure Alexandra has what she needs to keep you and your sisters safe. That means I have questions for you, too." Toby shifted uncomfortably, but Alexandra gave him a reassuring nod. Margaret's questions were simple at first. How old he was, how long he'd been taking care of the babies, who had helped him since his mother died. But then she asked, "Do you trust Alexandra?" Toby's answer was quiet but clear. "Yeah. She's the first person who didn't just walk past." Margaret's gaze flicked to Alexandra. "That's a good start?" After Margaret left, Toby lingered near the kitchen island while Alexandra poured tea. "She's not with the government, right?" he asked. "No," Alexandra assured him. "She's on our side. She's going to help make sure the petition goes through smoothly. Toby nodded slowly. Okay. Then, almost as an afterthought, if we stay, could I go to school again? She smiled. Yes, and not just any school. I'd like you to go to Dalton. He frowned. That's like, for rich people. It's for kids with potential, she said. And you have more than you think. The following week was a blur of appointments. Alexandra took Toby and the twins to a private pediatric clinic in the Upper East Side for full evaluations. Dr. Stein managed the twins' care while another specialist assessed Toby's health and education needs. In between, Alexandra and her attorney drafted a guardianship petition thick enough to double as a doorstop. It included affidavits from Dr. Stein, Rosa, and even Margaret Ellis, all attesting to Alexandra's capacity to provide a stable, nurturing home. The legal language was precise. Permanent private guardianship of minors, Toby Miller, Sophie Hayes, and Sarah Hayes, with all attendant rights and responsibilities. One evening, after the babies were asleep, Toby wandered into Alexandra's study. He hovered by the doorway, hands in his pockets. Do we have to tell people about him? He asked. She knew exactly who he meant. About Thomas? Yeah. Her voice softened. In court, yes. The judge needs the truth. But outside of that, we tell only what you're ready to share. Toby nodded, relief flickering across his face. Okay, I don't want people thinking bad stuff about my mom. She loved you, Alexandra said firmly. That's all that matters. On the day they were scheduled to file the petition, Alexandra found Toby in the nursery, carefully buttoning a tiny cardigan on Sophie. Ready? She asked. He looked up, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Yeah, I guess I am. At the courthouse, the clerk raised an eyebrow at the stack of documents but stamped them without comment. The date for the preliminary hearing was set, 2 weeks from today. Walking out into the winter air, Toby glanced at her. So, we just wait now? We wait, she said, and we prepare. That night, Alexandra sat alone in the quiet penthouse. The decision had been made, not in the courtroom, not in the boardroom, but here, in her own mind. She had chosen to fight for these children, not because it would be easy or clean, but because it was the only choice that felt like living. The snow had stopped, and the city lights glowed against the dark. Somewhere in the guest room, Toby was telling his sisters a story in a low voice, the words indistinct but the tone warm. Alexandra closed her eyes and listened. She realized then that she was no longer calculating risk and reward. She was simply, finally, building a home. The Hayes Realty boardroom was a glass and marble monument to Manhattan power. 30 feet of polished table, panoramic windows framing the skyline, and chairs occupied by men and women who had built careers on deals worth more than small countries. Alexandra Hayes had sat at the head of this table for 3 years, inheriting the position after Thomas's death. She had faced hostile takeovers, media storms, and shareholder revolts, but nothing compared to the meeting that awaited her now. Charles Hayes, her late husband's older brother, sat 2 seats down, immaculate in a charcoal suit, his silver hair combed with surgical precision. His eyes, cold and assessing, followed her as she entered. Around him, the other board members straightened their papers, the subtle choreography of people preparing for confrontation. Alexandra, Charles began, his voice smooth but edged with steel, we need to address your recent decisions. She took her seat, deliberately unhurried. If this is about the new Midtown development, the projections are in your packets. It's not, he said, flipping a page in the leather-bound agenda. It's about your decision to take in 3 minors. Children who, as I understand it, have a direct blood claim to the Hayes estate. The air in the room shifted. Let's be clear, Alexandra said evenly. 2 of them do. The 3rd is their brother, and I am seeking guardianship of all 3. That's precisely the problem, Charles replied. You are making personal, emotional decisions that have legal and financial implications for this company. The board cannot ignore the risk. Alexandra had expected this. The law firm handling the guardianship had warned her, once the children's connection to Thomas became public, or even whispered in the right circles, it would trigger a chain reaction in the company's governance. Under the Hayes Realty bylaws, any direct heirs to the founder's estate had potential claims not only to personal assets, but to voting shares. I have legal counsel ensuring this process doesn't interfere with corporate operations, Alexandra said. This is a family matter. Charles's smile was thin. When the family matter involves heirs to controlling stock, it becomes a corporate matter. Another board member, Evelyn Parker, spoke up, tall, elegant, with a voice like cut crystal. Alexandra, you must see how this appears. The press will have a field day. Hayes Realty Chair takes in secret love children of late CEO. It's salacious, it's distracting, and it undermines shareholder confidence. Alexandra clasped her hands on the table. Or perhaps they'll see it for what it is, honoring a moral obligation to family. Charles leaned forward. Or they'll see it as reckless. Which brings us to the next item. A motion to remove you as chairwoman of Hayes Realty, effective immediately, pending shareholder approval. The words landed like a gavel. For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the heating vents. Alexandra felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same she'd felt during hostile negotiations, but beneath it was something steadier, hotter. You'd strip me of my position because I chose to give 3 children a home? She asked. Because you're letting sentiment cloud judgment, Charles said. This company was not built on sentiment. She let her gaze travel the table, meeting each set of eyes. And yet sentiment is what builds trust with our clients, with our investors. People believe in Hayes Realty because we are more than glass and steel. We are legacy. And legacy isn't just what we build. It's who we protect. The vote was scheduled for the following week. Until then, she would remain chair, but the whispers had already begun, reporters calling her office, shareholders sending curt emails demanding explanations. Back at the penthouse, she found Toby in the living room, the twins napping beside him in their bassinets. He looked up from the television. You're home early. Board meeting ended sooner than expected, she said, removing her coat. You look mad. She considered softening it, but decided against it. Some people at the company don't think I should be in charge anymore because I took you in. His brow furrowed. That's stupid. Agreed, she said, smiling faintly. But in business, people sometimes hide behind rules when what they really mean is they don't like change. The following morning, she called her communications director. Schedule a press conference, she said. Plaza Hotel Ballroom, Friday at 10 a.m. Invite every major outlet, Times, Journal, Post, the networks. No questions off limits. Alexandra, the director cautioned. Once you say their names, there's no going back. I'm not hiding them, she said. If this is going to be a fight, we fight in daylight. Friday came with crisp winter air and a bank of cameras outside the plaza's ornate entrance. Alexandra arrived in a black wool coat, Toby at her side in a neatly pressed blazer. The twins were at home with Rosa, but their presence seemed to linger in the soft weight of Alexandra's expression. She stepped to the podium, microphones bristling in front of her. The chandeliers above cast warm light on the marble floor. 3 weeks ago, she began, I was driving home from a meeting when I saw a boy on the Brooklyn Bridge holding two newborns in the freezing rain. I stopped. I took them home, and I will not apologize for that. She told the story plainly, without embellishment, her voice steady even when she described learning the twins were Thomas's children. I have chosen to become their legal guardian, not because of bloodlines or obligations, but because it was the right thing to do. Flashes erupted from the photographer's corner. These children are part of my family now, she continued, and if protecting them costs me my position, so be it. Hayes Realty was founded on the belief that we build for people, not just profit. I intend to live by that. Back at the penthouse that evening, Toby hovered in the doorway to her study. I saw it on TV, he said. You were good. She looked up from her desk. Thank you. They're not going to fire you, right? She hesitated. They might try, but I've been through bigger battles. He smirked faintly. Bet they didn't have you on their side. The next week, the board vote was held. Alexandra walked into the room knowing the numbers would be close. Charles delivered his case with corporate precision, citing bylaws and shareholder responsibilities. When it was her turn, she spoke for exactly 3 minutes, about integrity, about the cost of leadership, about the difference between managing assets and honoring a legacy. When the ballots were counted, the motion failed by 1 vote. 1. Charles's jaw was tight as he gathered his papers. This isn't over, he said. No, Alexandra replied. It's just beginning. That night she returned home to the sound of Toby's laughter, real laughter, drifting down the hallway. In the nursery, he was dangling a soft toy over Sophie's crib while Sarah gurgled nearby. He glanced up when he saw her. You win? He asked. Yes, she said, stepping closer. We win. And for the first time since the DNA report landed on her desk, Alexandra felt not just resolve, but joy. The storm had passed, for now. The morning after the boardroom vote, the headlines were everywhere. Hayes Realty chair defies family backlash, stands by late CEO's secret heirs. From boardroom to nursery, Alexandra Hayes's unlikely new role. Power, properties, and paternity. Inside the storm at Hayes Realty. Alexandra scrolled through the digital editions over her coffee, the crisp pages of the Wall Street Journal open beside her. Some articles praised her as a compassionate leader, willing to put people before profit. Others called her reckless, accusing her of tarnishing the company's image for personal sentiment. What none of them had was the truth of the quiet mornings in the penthouse, Toby feeding the twins with precise care, the soft coos of babies in the sunlit nursery, the slow weaving of trust between strangers turning into family. Her communications director, Lauren Pierce, called just after 9. We're getting requests from 60 Minutes, Good Morning America, and a dozen podcasts, Lauren said, her voice brisk but tinged with excitement. You've got momentum, Alexandra. If you want to control the narrative, now's the time. Alexandra's eyes flicked to Toby, who was sitting at the kitchen island sketching in a notebook. We'll do 1 interview. 1. And it has to be live. Lauren paused. Live? Yes, Alexandra said. No editing, no twisting my words. We tell the story once, straight. The network they chose was CBS, the setting a warm-toned studio designed to look like a living room. Alexandra arrived with Toby at her side, both of them dressed in simple, clean lines. No corporate armor, just authenticity. The interviewer, a seasoned journalist named Donna Whitaker, began gently. Alexandra, you've been called everything from guardian angel to corporate liability in the last week. Why take this risk? Alexandra didn't look at the cameras. She looked at Dana. Because when I saw a boy standing in the freezing rain with 2 newborns, I didn't see risk. I saw responsibility, and I believe responsibility is not something you negotiate, It's something you accept. Dana turned to Toby. And you? What did you think when Alexandra stopped for you? Toby shifted in his seat, his voice quiet but steady. I thought she was crazy, but she kept her promise. Nobody else ever did that for us before. The interview aired that night and was replayed in clips across social media. Viewers responded with a flood of comments, some critical but most deeply moved. Donations began arriving for children's charities Alexandra had quietly supported for years. The narrative was shifting. But Charles Hayes wasn't finished. 3 days later, Alexandra's phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. He's gone to the tabloids. The article in question was pure venom. Anonymous sources claiming Alexandra was exploiting the children for sympathy, using them to distract from financial mismanagement at Hayes Realty. At the penthouse, Toby slammed the printed article onto the counter. This is garbage. They don't know anything. Alexandra kept her voice even. This is how some people fight. Not in court, but in the court of public opinion. So fight back, he urged. Oh, I will, she said, a spark lighting in her eyes. 2 nights later, Alexandra hosted a charity gala at the Metropolitan Club, an event already on the calendar for months, but now perfectly timed. The guest list included influential journalists, philanthropists, and half the city's business elite. When she took the podium, the chandeliers scattering gold light over the room, she didn't mention Charles by name. She didn't need to. Some have questioned my choices, she began. They've said compassion has no place in business. I disagree. I believe compassion is the foundation of lasting success. Without it, we build nothing that endures. The applause was warm, sincere, and the next morning's coverage was firmly in her favor. Still, Alexandra knew the battle wasn't only about perception. It was about proving, day by day, that she could run a multi-billion-dollar company and raise 3 children without either collapsing. She invited a documentary crew from a respected nonprofit to spend a single day shadowing her, not in the boardroom, but at home. They filmed Toby helping with a conference call setup, the twins babbling in the background, Alexandra balancing contracts on one side and a baby bottle on the other. The resulting 10-minute segment posted online went viral for its rawness. It wasn't polished PR. It was life, messy and full, and people believed it. But the pressure was unrelenting. Paparazzi began camping outside the building. Reporters shouted questions as Alexandra and Toby walked the twins in the park. One afternoon, Toby froze when a stranger with a camera lunged too close to the stroller. Alexandra stepped between them, her voice ice-cold. Back! Away! The man muttered something about public interest before retreating. Toby's hands were still clenched when they got back upstairs. Is it always like this for you? He asked. Not always, she admitted. But when the spotlight comes, you can't control who steps into it. What you can control is how you carry yourself inside it. That weekend, Alexandra got an unexpected call from Dana Whitaker, the CBS journalist. I don't usually do this, Dana said, but I thought you should know. Charles approached another network. He's planning to go on air with his own version of events. Alexandra felt the old boardroom adrenaline rise. Then we make sure the truth is louder. She called Lauren, her communications director, and within hours they had booked a primetime segment on Anderson Cooper 360. This time, Alexandra came armed with more than sentiment. She brought documentation, guardianship filings, financial statements showing company growth under her leadership, and sworn statements from Dr. Brownstein and Margaret Ellis attesting to the children's well-being. When Anderson Cooper asked if she believed Charles's opposition was about protecting the company, Alexandra didn't hesitate. No, it's about power. And when power feels threatened, it looks for a story to make the threat disappear. But the truth doesn't disappear, it survives. And so will we. The fallout was swift. Charles's credibility took a hit, and even some of his allies began to distance themselves. Alexandra's stock, both literal and figurative, rose. One night, as the twins slept and the city hummed below, Toby sat on the couch with a laptop, scrolling through article after article. "You know," he said, glancing up, "people are starting to like you." She laughed. "Starting?" "Yeah, but it's weird. They're not just talking about you as some CEO, they're talking about you as family." The word caught her off guard, warming her in a way headlines never could. "Then maybe," she said softly, "we're winning the only battle that matters." The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan rose like a fortress of stone and glass, its steps flanked by flags snapping in the winter wind. Alexandra Hayes had been here many times for business disputes, but this was different. This time, the stakes were not measured in millions of dollars or corporate assets. They were measured in the lives of 3 children. The courtroom was already half full when she entered with her legal team. Reporters filled the back benches, pens poised. Across the aisle sat Charles Hayes, his posture rigid, his own attorneys spread out like a phalanx. The case name, Hayes v. Hayes, was printed on the docket in stark black letters. Judge Miriam Feldman presided from the bench, a woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for cutting through theatrics. She glanced over her reading glasses at the room. "This is a hearing to determine guardianship of minors Toby Miller, Sophie Hayes, and Sarah Hayes," she began. Petitioner, Alexandra Hayes. Contestant, Charles Hayes. We will also address the request to freeze certain portions of the Hayes estate, pending determination of heirs. Charles's lead attorney, Richard Fallon, rose first. He was polished, with a voice like smooth gravel. "Your Honor, my client seeks to ensure that the estate of the late Thomas Hayes is protected from undue influence. The petitioner, while chair of Hayes Realty, has taken into her home 3 minors, 2 of whom are alleged to be Thomas Hayes's children, and 1 who is unrelated by blood. We contend that this arrangement is not in the best interests of the minors, and that a neutral guardian should be appointed." Alexandra's attorney, Charles Wainwright, stood. His tone was precise, almost surgical. "Your Honor, the DNA evidence, conducted at Columbia Presbyterian, confirms that Sophie and Sarah Hayes are indeed the biological children of Thomas Hayes. My client has provided for their care since the day she found them, along with their older brother Toby, who has been their sole caretaker since birth. We have affidavits from pediatric specialists, a retired family court judge, and social workers affirming the stability and quality of this home." Fallon smirked slightly. "And yet, Your Honor, Ms. Hayes has not adopted these children. She seeks guardianship, but also stands to control substantial assets as a result. This presents a clear conflict of interest." The judge turned to Alexandra. "Mrs. Hayes, please take the stand." She walked to the witness box, the weight of every camera lens in the room following her. "Mrs. Hayes," the judge said, "you are aware that granting you guardianship will give you legal authority over the minor's inheritance?" "Yes, Your Honor," Alexandra replied, "and I accept that responsibility. But I'm here because I promised these children they would not be separated. This is not about their inheritance, it's about their home." Fallon rose for cross-examination. "Mrs. Hayes, isn't it true that your company's stock price rose after you took in these children?" "I suppose it did," Alexandra said. "But the market reacts to many things. I did not take them in for publicity." Fallon's voice sharpened. "And yet you've appeared on national television speaking about them." "To protect them from the lies being spread by people in this room," she said, her gaze fixed on him. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Feldman banged her gavel lightly. "Order." When it was their turn, Wainwright called Dr. Helen Stein to the stand. She testified about the twins' condition when Alexandra brought them home: hypothermic, dehydrated, in need of immediate care. They would not have survived the night without intervention, Dr. Stein said firmly. Next came Margaret Ellis, the retired judge, who spoke to Alexandra's character and stability as a guardian. In my professional opinion, she told the court, these children are thriving under her care. Separating them from Alexandra, or from each other, would be a profound disservice. The most emotional testimony came from Toby himself. He walked to the stand in a navy blazer, his hands trembling slightly as he was sworn in. "Toby," Wainwright began gently, "can you tell the court what happened the day you met Alexandra?" He glanced at her before answering. "It was raining. I was on the bridge with my sisters because I didn't know where else to go. I thought maybe someone would stop, but nobody did. Until her." "And why do you want to stay with her?" Toby's voice caught. "Because she keeps her word. Because she doesn't look at us like a problem. She looks at us like we matter." Even Fallon didn't press him on cross-examination. By mid-afternoon, both sides had presented their arguments. Fallon's closing was cold, clinical, emphasizing the risk to the estate and suggesting a court-appointed guardian could manage both care and assets without the appearance of impropriety. Wainwright's closing was measured but powerful. "Your Honor, the law allows us to consider the best interests of the child above all else. Not the comfort of board members, not the convenience of accountants, but the children themselves. Toby, Sophie, and Sarah have already lost their mother. They never knew their father. Mrs. Hayes is the only constant they have now. To remove them from her care would be to punish them for the sins of adults." Judge Feldman recessed for 20 minutes to review the evidence. Alexandra sat at the petitioner's table, hands folded tightly in her lap. Toby leaned toward her. "If she says no—" "She won't," Alexandra said, though her voice was quieter than she intended. When the judge returned, the room held its breath. "I have reviewed the filings, the testimony, and the exhibits," she began. "It is the finding of this court that Alexandra Hayes is a fit and proper guardian for all three minors. The petition for permanent private guardianship is hereby granted. Further, the request to freeze estate assets is denied." The gavel came down. Relief hit Alexandra like a wave. Toby exhaled audibly, a grin breaking across his face before he remembered they were still in court. Charles's expression was unreadable, but the set of his jaw spoke volumes. Outside the courthouse, a cluster of reporters waited. Alexandra stepped to the microphones only long enough to say, "We're going home." And they did. Together. That night, in the warm glow of the penthouse, Alexandra poured herself a glass of wine while Toby sat on the floor with the twins. "So, we're safe?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Legally, permanently, and in every way that matters." He nodded, then looked up at her. "Good. Because I wasn't going anywhere." For the first time since the Brooklyn Bridge, Alexandra allowed herself to believe it. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were building something, together. Winter melted into a hesitant New York spring. The snowbanks along Fifth Avenue receded into gray slush, and the first crocuses poked up in Central Park. Life inside Alexandra Hayes's penthouse began to find its rhythm. The twins waking like clockwork at 2 a.m., Toby learning the subtle art of burping babies, Alexandra balancing investor calls with midnight feedings. And now, Toby had something new to adjust to. School. Not just any school. The Dalton School. On his first morning, he stood in the foyer wearing a crisp navy blazer, a white shirt, and a tie that Rosa had knotted twice before Alexandra stepped in to fix it. "You'll get used to it," she said, smoothing the knot. "First impressions matter." He frowned. "Feels like I'm wearing someone else's skin." "It won't for long," she said. Dalton will challenge you. That's a good thing. The car ride up Madison Avenue was quiet except for the sound of the twins cooing in the back seat, riding along for the drop-off. When they pulled up in front of the stately red brick building, Toby hesitated. The students streaming in wore the same uniform, but their polished shoes and easy smiles marked them as kids who had never stood on a bridge in the rain. "You belong here," Alexandra told him, reading his thoughts. "Remember that." The first week was rough. Toby was smart. Alexandra had known that from the moment she heard him speak. But Dalton wasn't just about intelligence. It was about navigating a world where conversations at lunch casually dropped references to ski trips in Aspen and family art collections. One afternoon, he came home tight-lipped. Rosa coaxed him into eating a sandwich before Alexandra arrived. "They think I'm some charity case," he muttered when she asked. "One kid said I should be grateful to be here. Like I'm lucky." "You are lucky," Alexandra said gently. "But so are they. They just don't know it." That weekend, Alexandra began what she privately called Toby's second education. She hired a social coach, James Calloway, a former diplomat who taught etiquette and public speaking at Columbia. On the first day, James set up a folding table in the penthouse living room. "Rule 1, he said. "You meet people where they are, but you stand on your own ground." For an hour, Toby practiced shaking hands, introducing himself and looking people in the eye. It was awkward at first, but Alexandra saw the flickers of confidence in the way his shoulders squared. The following week, she added something new. Finance lessons. Not just balancing a checkbook, Alexandra taught him how to read a stock chart, how to understand a quarterly earnings report, how to recognize when numbers didn't add up. "You're not just learning this for you," she told him one evening, sliding a financial statement across the kitchen island. "You're learning it so no one can take advantage of you or your sisters." The changes were gradual but visible. Toby started answering more questions in class. He joined Dalton's debate club, where his first match ended in a narrow loss but left him grinning all the way home. One night, Alexandra found him in the library, reading a biography of Nelson Mandela. "Homework?" she asked. "Not exactly. Just trying to figure out how people go from nothing to changing everything." She sat beside him. "It's not magic. It's work. And the willingness to keep standing even when the ground shakes." Midway through the semester, Dalton hosted a student presentation night. Toby had signed up, at Alexandra's gentle insistence, to give a 5-minute talk on urban development and housing inequality. The night of the event, the auditorium was packed with parents, students, and faculty. Alexandra sat in the second row, the twins asleep in their stroller beside her. When Toby walked on stage, she saw the flicker of nerves in the way he adjusted the microphone. Then he began. "Most people think skyscrapers are just tall buildings, but they're also symbols of who belongs in a city and who gets pushed out. My family's story is about being pushed out, but I think we can build cities that don't do that." He spoke with quiet authority, weaving in facts he'd learned from Alexandra's own development projects and stories from Queens. When he finished, the applause was more than polite. It was genuine. Alexandra saw the pride in his eyes as he left the stage. Later that night, back at the penthouse, she handed him a folder. Inside was a certificate. Dalton School Civic Leadership Award, presented to Toby Miller. "They just gave me that to make me feel good," he said, though his voice betrayed a hint of pride. "No," she replied. "They gave it to you because you earned it." But growth didn't mean the challenges disappeared. One afternoon, Toby came home early, clearly upset. "What happened?" Alexandra asked. "Some kids were making jokes about the twins, about how they don't match me, and how you probably just picked us out like pets." Her temper flared, but she kept her voice calm. "And what did you say?" "I didn't. I just walked away. She nodded slowly. Sometimes walking away is strength, but other times, you have to stand and say, "This is my family, and they're worth more than your ignorance." Toward the end of spring term, Dalton held its annual networking luncheon, an event where students mingled with prominent alumni. Alexandra accompanied Toby, introducing him to real estate developers, lawyers, and civic leaders. At one table, an alumnus asked Toby bluntly, "So what's your story? How'd you end up living with Ms. Hayes?" Toby glanced at Alexandra, then answered without hesitation. "She stopped for me when no one else did. Now we're family." Alexandra saw the way the man's expression softened. She knew then that Toby wasn't just learning to stand tall. He was learning to stand in his truth. On the last day of school before summer break, Toby came home with a stack of books under his arm. "These are for the summer reading program," he explained. "And I signed up for the student council next year." Alexandra smiled. "Sounds like someone who's not just surviving, Dalton. He's owning it." He shrugged, but she saw the grin he was trying to hide. That evening, as they ate dinner with the twins babbling in their high chairs, Alexandra realized the boy she'd met on the Brooklyn Bridge was still there, but he was growing into someone new, someone who could face a room full of strangers and hold his ground, someone who would one day lead. And she knew her job wasn't just to protect him anymore. It was to prepare him for the world. The summer heat rolled into Manhattan like a heavy blanket. Even on the 35th floor of the penthouse, the city's hum was constant. Sirens in the distance, the low thrum of traffic, and the occasional honk from impatient cab drivers below. Inside, the twins had been restless for 2 days, their usual giggles replaced with cranky fussing. Alexandra noticed it first with Sophie, the way her breathing seemed faster, the faint pink flush on her cheeks that wasn't from the July sun. "She feels warm," Alexandra murmured, holding Sophie against her shoulder. Rosa, hovering nearby, frowned. "Maybe it's just the weather?" Alexandra shook her head. "No, this is different." By evening, Sophie's temperature had climbed higher. She was listless, her tiny hands curling weakly. Alexandra called Dr. Stein immediately. "Bring her in," the doctor said without hesitation. The pediatric clinic on the Upper East Side was quiet at that hour, the air cool and antiseptic. Toby sat in the corner of the exam room, holding Sarah while Alexandra cradled Sophie on the table. Dr. Stein listened to Sophie's lungs, her expression tightening. "I'm hearing crackles. Could be early pneumonia. We'll need to admit her for observation." The word pneumonia hit Alexandra like a stone. She knew how fast it could turn dangerous in infants. At New York Presbyterian Hospital, the admitting nurse led them to a pediatric room painted in soft blues and greens. Toby followed close behind, his knuckles white where he clutched Sarah's blanket. "I'm staying," he announced, before anyone could tell him otherwise. Alexandra met his eyes. "We both are." They watched as a nurse inserted a tiny IV into Sophie's arm, her cries sharp and thin. Toby winced but didn't look away. Alexandra rested a hand on his shoulder. "She's in good hands." The first night was the longest. Machines beeped softly, oxygen hissed in a corner, and the hallway lights cast long shadows across the floor. Alexandra dozed in the reclining chair, waking every time Sophie stirred. Toby, sitting cross-legged on the other chair, refused to sleep. He kept his eyes on his sister, murmuring quiet reassurances she was too young to understand. Around 3 a.m., Alexandra spoke softly across the space between them. "You've been here all night without closing your eyes." "I can't," he said simply. "What if she needs me?" "She has nurses for that." "She has me," he countered. Alexandra didn't argue. She recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same look she'd worn the night Thomas was in the ICU when she'd refused to leave his side. By morning, Sophie's fever had inched down, but her breathing was still labored. The pediatrician ordered more tests. Toby followed every instruction, fetching water, holding Sophie's favorite soft toy, making sure Sarah had enough snacks and a place to nap in the corner. At one point, Alexandra stepped into the hallway to take a call from Charles Wainwright about an urgent contract. When she returned, she found Toby leaning over Sophie's crib, telling her in a low voice about his day at school, about the book he'd been reading.
"She can't even understand you yet," Alexandra said with a faint smile.
"Doesn't matter," he replied. "It's so she knows she's not alone." The second night was worse. Sophie's oxygen levels dipped briefly, triggering an alarm that brought a rush of nurses into the room. Alexandra's stomach clenched as they adjusted her IV and checked her vitals. Toby stood frozen at the foot of the bed, his hands curled into fists. When the nurses left, Alexandra crouched beside him.
"She's stable now."
They caught it in time. He nodded, but his voice was raw when he said, "I thought we were going to lose her."
"You won't lose her,"
Alexandra said firmly.
"Not while I'm here. Not while we're here."
By the third day, the antibiotics began to work. Sophie's fever broke, and her breathing eased. The relief in the room was palpable. Toby finally allowed himself to sleep for more than an hour at a time, his head resting against the arm of the chair. When Dr. Stein came by with the discharge papers, she looked at Alexandra.
"She'll need a week of rest at home, but she's out of danger."
Alexandra exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders.
"Thank you."
Back at the penthouse, the mood shifted instantly. The nursery seemed brighter, the air lighter. Toby set up Sophie's crib with extra care, arranging her blankets and favorite toy, exactly as they'd been at the hospital. That night, after the twins were asleep, Alexandra found Toby on the balcony, looking out over the city lights.
"You did well," she said.
He shrugged. "I didn't do much."
"You did everything," she corrected. "You stayed. You protected her. That matters more than anything else."
Toby was quiet for a moment. Then he said,
"When we were in the hospital, I kept thinking, I can't lose her. I can't lose either of them. They're all I've got."
Alexandra stepped beside him.
"You've got more than that now."
He glanced at her, the city reflected in his eyes. "Yeah, I guess I do." The crisis had done something that weeks of comfort and lessons couldn't. It had cemented their bond in the unshakable way only shared fear and survival could. Toby was no longer just learning how to stand tall in the classroom or the boardroom. He was learning how to stand tall when it mattered most. And Alexandra, watching him grow into that role, realized that the boy she'd found on the Brooklyn Bridge had already become a guardian in his own right. Autumn returned to Manhattan with a crispness in the air and a light that turned the skyline gold at dusk. By now, the rhythm of life in Alexandra Hayes's penthouse had settled into something steady and real. Toby was thriving at Dalton. The twins had taken their first wobbly steps in the nursery, and the shadows of the court battles and media storms had begun to fade. But Alexandra knew this chapter of their lives wasn't just about survival. It was about what they would build next, something that would outlast even her. The idea had taken root during Sophie's hospital stay, when Alexandra had sat in the pediatric wing watching parents in worn jackets pacing the halls, their worry etched deep. She had overheard one mother tell a nurse she couldn't afford to bring her child back for follow-up care. That night, Alexandra had opened a blank document on her laptop and typed 2 words at the top. Odessa Foundation, named for Odessa Miller, Toby's mother. Now, months later, the foundation was ready to launch. Its mission was simple but urgent: to provide financial, medical, and housing support to single mothers and abandoned children in New York City, ensuring no child would be left in the cold as Toby and his sisters once had been. The launch event would be held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a place Alexandra had always loved for its quiet grandeur. In the week leading up to it, the penthouse was a whirl of planning, designers finalizing the stage layout, caterers confirming menus, and Alexandra's team coordinating with the press. Through it all, Toby watched with quiet fascination. You've been in boardrooms, courtrooms, TV studios, and now an art museum, he said one evening. Is there anywhere you can't run a meeting? Alexandra smiled. Probably a skate park. On the night of the gala, the great hall of the Met glowed under soft lighting, the marble steps lined with arrangements of white lilies and blue hydrangeas. Guests in evening wear mingled among sculptures and towering columns, the sound of a string quartet drifting through the air. Alexandra arrived with Toby at her side, the twins in the care of Rosa for the evening. She wore a midnight blue gown, her hair swept back, the diamond studs in her ears catching the light. Toby looked sharp in a tailored suit, his tie perfectly knotted this time without help. They greeted donors, city officials, and community leaders. Each handshake and introduction felt less like networking and more like planting seeds for the work ahead. When it was time for the speeches, Alexandra stepped to the podium. The room quieted, the sound of cameras clicking fading into the hush. Many of you know me as a businesswoman, she began. But tonight is not about buildings or contracts. It's about the spaces between them, the lives lived in their shadows. She told the story of the Brooklyn Bridge that night in the rain, of finding Toby and the twins, of the promises made and kept. We can't change the past, she said, but we can decide what we build for the future. The Odessa Foundation will be that future, for every child who needs a place to belong. Applause swelled through the hall. Alexandra stepped back, and Toby walked forward. He paused at the podium, looking out over the crowd. His voice, when it came, was steady. My name is Toby Miller. I used to think the world was split into two kinds of people, those who passed by and those who stopped. I know now that stopping isn't enough. You have to stay. You have to build something that lasts. He glanced at Alexandra. That's what she did for me. And it's what I want to do for others. I'm going to study law when I'm older, so I can protect kids like me from losing the only thing they have left, their family. There was a long moment of silence, and then the room erupted in applause. After the speeches, Alexandra and Toby stood near the Temple of Dender, the reflecting pool mirroring the soft glow of the evening lights. You did well, she said. So did you, he replied, then grinned. Guess we make a good team. They lingered there, letting the hum of conversation and music fade into the background. The night felt like a turning point, not an ending, but the opening of something new. A week later, on a bright Saturday morning, Alexandra suggested a walk. Toby pushed the twins in their stroller as they made their way through the city streets. Eventually, they reached the Brooklyn Bridge. The wind was gentler this time, the sky a clear blue. They stopped in the very spot where she had first seen him months ago, thin, soaked, clutching two tiny lives. Looks different now, Toby said quietly. It is different, she agreed, because this time we're walking away together. They stood for a moment longer, the city stretching out before them, and then they turned toward home. In the months that followed, the Odessa Foundation began its work, funding pediatric care for children in shelters, partnering with legal aid societies to keep families together, and opening its first transitional housing unit in Queens. Alexandra spent her mornings in the office and her evenings in the nursery, her life no longer divided into neat compartments, but richer for the way it all overlapped. Toby thrived at Dalton, not just in academics but as a leader, mentoring younger students, volunteering at the foundation, and taking the twins to the park on weekends. For Alexandra, the greatest shift was internal. She had spent years guarding herself against loss, building walls high enough to keep grief at bay. But those walls had never kept the storms out. What they had kept out was life itself. Now the storms no longer frightened her. She knew they could be weathered, because she would not face them alone. Epilogue. Years later, people would talk about the night at the Met when Alexandra Hayes launched the Odessa Foundation as if it were the start of everything. But for her, the real beginning had been in the rain on the Brooklyn Bridge, the moment she chose to stop, to step into someone else's storm, and in doing so, found her way out of her own. And for Toby, it had been the moment he realized a promise kept could change everything, not just for the one who received it, but for the one who made it. Thank you for staying with Alexandra, Toby, and the twins until the very last moment of this journey. From that cold, rainy night on the Brooklyn Bridge to the warm evening at the Metropolitan, we've witnessed a family built not by blood, but by promises kept and love chosen every single day. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to stay with us. Here, every story carries a warm light, a touch of healing, and a reminder that in this big city, there will always be someone willing to stop for another. See you in the next story.